what we really should be thinking more about is like the preservation of the kind rather than of the species, because in most cases, obviously.
This comical blunder from Tim Chaffee is the culmination of Answers in Genesis, seeing massive procreation as the vehicle to make their story work. We will wander through Gobekli Tepe and past some crows and ravens to arrive here. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Today, we are with Answers News. I haven't done anything on them in a while, as they had become repetitive and boring, but they are attempting to make themselves less so. They have modernized their thumbnails to shocked and cringing faces as clickbait. Ken Ham is almost never seen anymore. The younger generation is now taking over. They might be trying to keep pace with the culture a bit and have arrived at the 2010s. Let's see if the content has been updated at all, shall we?
I think it's pronounced Gobekli Tepe.
That's pretty good, yeah.
See, I did pretty good on that.
Yeah.
All right, maybe made by aliens, says Mayor. All right, so why don't you talk about the archaeological significance of this particular place?
Yeah, so Gobekli Tepe is often viewed as one of the very first cities that have been found, one of the earliest cities. Of course, in our view, that would be one of the first cities post-flood, of course, post-Babel as well.
Right.
Tim Chaffee has to add this because, oops, the article they are featuring quite clearly says that this city is 12,000 years old. But there are a lot of problems with trying to find a place to cram Gobekli Tepe into a biblical narrative. The first problem is that it was the earliest known human city. There are signs that the people were hunter-gatherers and didn't have agriculture yet. This is supported by there being no evidence of domesticated animals and no domesticated varieties of plants. Of great historical significance, which even AIG acknowledges, is that it had been thought that the discovery of agriculture led to humans settling in cities. This discovery called that hypothesis into question. AIG condescendingly puts it this way: most archaeologists now believe that Gobekli Tepe was a sanctuary or retreat used for spiritual or communal purposes, rather than a city with homes and children. If so, this does not fit the secular view of human culture, which assumed hunter-gatherers eventually learned to farm, settled down, and only then made monuments. This site has forced archaeologists to consider the possibility that human drive to build and worship came first. This is true, but if Tim Chaffee and AIG were right, and this was a post-flood settlement and historians just got the dates wrong, why is there a Garden of Eden? Why is Abel raising crops pre-flood when even in the post-flood era, agriculture hasn't been discovered yet? To make this fit your Bible story, you also have to pretend that it doesn't have the historical significance that it does, of it being a pre-agrarian civilization. The way AIG goes about picking and choosing which parts of a story to show and which parts to hide because they don't fit their worldview would be comical if it wasn't taken as literal truth by so many people. Like the family that I overheard while I was at my local botanical gardens, and they were planning a trip to Ark Encounter. I wanted so badly to tell them, no! But I restrained myself and walked on. Here's another major problem that AIG has created for itself. It's nowhere near as monumental as the heat problem, but it's just as impossible. Chaffee dates Gobekli Tepe to,
Of course, in our view, that would be one of the first cities post-flood, of course, post-Babel as
the AIG article agrees and adds, hundreds of people would have needed years to make this. But then in this article, AIG has the pyramids being built in Egypt simultaneously. It discusses the problem of having enough people to build the pyramids in Egypt so close to the time that the human bottleneck of the flood had occurred. They argue, if we assume that Mizraim left Babel with a family of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, and if each couple averaged 8 children every 30 years, we have to ignore the incest, which is probably quite conservative. In 150 years, we could easily have nearly 30,000 descendants. In 250 years, the population could explode to well over 1 million. Except that would require a population growth rate of 5.7%. Even in the baby boom, world population growth rate was only 2%. It is possible for one region to be out of sync, as shown here, but that gets counterbalanced at the other end of the scale. The highest population growth ever recorded wasn't even 5%. So claiming that it could be 5.7% in ancient times is preposterous. AIG tries to solve the problem by having a 0% death rate. But to achieve this, you also need a 0% infant mortality rate. Good luck with that with no modern medicine. But worse, they then try to borrow from other populations. How many people were necessary to build a step pyramid? Well, with the right technology and resources, it would take far fewer people than most people think. There are several factors to take into account. The Egyptians likely had knowledge of building pyramids from the Tower of Babel. Right, because the pyramids looked just like a tower. They surely had many labor-saving technologies, cranes, hoists, etc. I'm not making this up. AIG thinks that these were real. The Egyptians could have hired outside help or used slave labor, as is evidenced by the time of Joseph, Genesis 37 to 40, or both. How can Egypt be borrowing laborers from the region when their closest neighbors are building Göbekli Tepe? For that matter, all of these must also be built simultaneously, as each gets built around the world as soon as the settler can reach the destination after leaving Babel. A few of those were additional pyramids, but you do also have the issue of all the pyramids being built nearly simultaneously. By moving every ancient human structure, and these are only the ones we know about, to all being built a couple centuries post-Babel, you need a similar population explosion everywhere on Earth. If there really was such a huge population explosion post-Babel, where did they all go? Why was there then a huge shift to decrease the population? You create so many problems by trying to make your view of history fit reality when it just doesn't. Georgia soon concludes that the mayor in the article likely said it was aliens to draw in tourists. She's probably right on that part. Next article.
How evolution helped crows and ravens take over the world. So that is a problematic title because evolution is not what is described in the article itself. It's more likely to say how speciation or variation within the kind that crows and ravens belong to helped them take over the world.
And that's not evolution.
Right, it's not evolution. That is a very different thing. So evolution is a change of one kind of organism into a different kind of organism.
Evolution is when one organism changes into a different organism? Georgia, you have a PhD in genetics. If you put this answer on even a high school test on evolution, what do you think would happen? It would be marked wrong, that's what. Because no matter where you look, a dictionary, an encyclopedia, a biology textbook, another biology textbook, an article, no matter where you look, nowhere in any of these is evolution ever defined as...
Evolution is a change of one kind of organism into a different kind of organism.
When I took your definition and Googled it, I got all these sites correcting me that I didn't have evolution right. Georgia, how can I, who got no further in biology than Biology 101, understand this better than you do? To be fair, I know far more about this from what I've learned on YouTube from Aaron Ra, Iced Rhino, Gutsick Gibbon, and others than what I remember from school. But in high school, I learned evolution the same way Georgia did, with blinders on. giving the teacher's lip service to what I knew was the correct answer from the book while telling myself that this was wrong. Georgia did her undergraduate work at Cedarville College, one of the few that is approved by AIG because they teach that evolution is false. I really wonder at the cognitive dissonance that she had to face while getting her PhD.
What we're talking about here is just speciation, right? So it's just like ravens and crows all belong to the same kind. And so while there might be variation within that kind, they're staying crows and ravens, right? They're not becoming a different type of bird. They're not becoming a non-bird. They're staying birds.
Of course they are, because if birds were giving birth to non-birds, this would not be evolution. In fact, nothing would be better evidence that evolution was wrong than if this was to happen.
Yeah, and that's interesting from the title, how evolution helped. Evolution, it's a concept.
For a moment there, I thought she said that evolution was a constant, admitting that she understood that evolution is going on all the time, and it isn't new species popping into existence every once in a while, like Georgia claimed. But sadly, no. When I checked again, she is saying concept, not constant. Oh well, she came close.
Yeah, and that's interesting from the title, how evolution helped. Evolution, it's a concept. It's not an entity. It's not a person. It can't help anyone.
Oh, for Pete's sake. If that was somehow some kind of gotcha against the point of the article, it's a headline. A headline is only supposed to be a few words long to introduce the topic and to draw the interest of the reader. It isn't supposed to be technical. If it was, you would have the same issue with your own headlines. Like this one, where AIG does the exact same thing. Maybe if you're going to complain about such technicalities, then abide by your own rules.
You know, it can even help itself. So that's the big problem. Even the title, logical fallacy. It's one of the things that once you learn, it's going to be very easy to see those problems, the logical problems.
Ah, if only that were true. If only Gabriella could in fact see the logical problems with things like thinking that light can travel millions of years in just 6,000 years to reach Earth, or that somehow Noah and family can survive on a boat in a flood that, if true, would create so much heat it would vaporize the Earth, or that kangaroos and koalas can float to Australia on logs, or that animals can survive on plants that were destroyed in the flood, after the flood, or every species on the planet can evolve from 1,400 kinds in a mere 4,300 years, and not just the ones living today, but all the extinct species that make up 90% of all the things that have ever lived. She believes in all these illogical, fallacious things, and she wants to nitpick at a headline for anthropomorphizing evolution. Sheesh, give me a break. Gabriella, I don't think you could spot a logical fallacy if it sat up on your desk and said, "Hi, I'm a logical fallacy."
Here.
And this really kind of reminded me of what Darwin was noticing with the finches on the Galapagos and everything, where you're seeing variation in beak sizes and other things, and because they seem to be adapted well for the island and the type of the foods that they have on those islands. Well, it's not because they evolved those things, it's because there was an original population that had certain traits, and those that were best suited for those are the ones that continue to thrive, whereas the other ones, they didn't survive as well.
What do you know? Tim actually does a good job of explaining evolution here. Yes, Tim, evolution is a population adapting to its environment by those members better suited to the environment surviving to pass down their genes, which are better suited to the environment. Way to go. You did it.
So what you're looking at is a loss of information in each of these times. You're not gaining new information. It's still
What? Where did this come from? The differences in the beaks varied. Some were longer, some were shorter, some were thicker, some were thinner. The differences made each more suited to the food that was available on the island that particular species lived on. There is nothing being added here. Gabriella just said a minute ago that she was good at spotting logical fallacies. Do you think she'll spot that Tim has just committed an ad hoc fallacy?
you're not gaining new information.
Nope. Went right over her head. She missed entirely that he's trying to counter a claim that hasn't even been made.
And still, those finches are still, guess what? Finches. They didn't become something else.
And now Tim is back to no longer understanding evolution. Oh well, it was good while it lasted.
Right.
And in these
Lions.
cases, yeah,
This is just so sad. Gabriella thinks she is so clever, pretending that a lion could evolve from a bird in a single generation. I'm wondering how one gets so lost in the delusion that one with her educational background can convince herself that this is logical, reasonable, and not the big pack of lies that it is. I was a believer and even for a time a young earther. But when confronted with the evidence, I shifted to old earth creationism, the idea that evolution existed but was just guided by God's creative hand. But it didn't take much, because I had been told by other young earthers that it was impossible for fish to grow lungs. So as soon as I saw lungfish in the shed aquarium, young earth was gone. I knew that they had lied. I stood and stared at the lungfish for several minutes. My son Robin didn't understand why I was so fascinated by them, nor did he get how much my worldview had just changed by seeing those fish. This is the danger of building a faith on lie after lie after lie, like this panel is doing. When just one is disproven, the whole structure begins to crumble. What I find so sad is that this panel has at their fingertips all the evidence they need to see that what they are claiming is completely wrong. Yet they are so sold on their God ideas that no reality can break through. What a waste of time, education, and resources.
that's right.
And
So,
you're just getting variation within. I mean, there's genetic diversity that God created animals with, and so depending on the environment that they're in, certain traits will be favored for,
Yeah.
certain traits will be favored against.
The one good thing I can say is that most of the seats here are empty. We need to keep emptying those seats. Let the auditorium be as empty as the panel's ideas on evolution.
Again, so to speak. That doesn't sound right, but anyway, select it again.
Disfavored.
Selection is really the term there. Select it for or select it again. And so you can get these variations, because at one point they say they acquired new beak shapes. No, they didn't acquire them. Okay, they were already there. They just became dominant through these different mechanisms that are in place. And so you get speciation, you get variation within the kind, but you definitely don't get evolution.
You get evolution as defined by biologists, real biologists, I mean, those that study with an open mind to learning, instead of taking courses with the aim of claiming the credentials to refute the things that you gave lip service to studying. The only way to make George's claims true is to redefine the terms to suit your purposes, exactly as Georgia has done here. Maybe we should classify this as a kind of evolution. The kind that not only doesn't work, it doesn't exist, just like Georgia's God.
Right. Yeah.
and that's classic. These are the types of things they point to in textbooks. They'll point to variation within a kind, which is observable, and we can see that. We agree with that.
Right.
But then they say, look at the little changes. Over a long period of time, it adds up to big changes, different kinds of animals. And no, it doesn't, because there's limits set by the DNA.
Right. And
There are limits on the DNA? Please, what are these limits? Where are these lines? A fish can grow lungs, but not flippers, bud skippers. Once an organism has flippers, those can't evolve into feet or arms into wings. Where is this line, and what is this limiting factor? I know, the God factor. God stands up in heaven and says, "You are evolving too far." Ha ha ha. Supernatural selection. You can breed no more. Kidding aside, they pretend like they are serious, but they have no serious answers to the legitimate questions.
And so after, raven was one of the birds that Noah sent out from the ark. And so after the flood, these birds would have went out and from the ark, and they're going to speciate. There's going to be variations, again, that are selected for or against, depending on the environments that they're in.
How? The earth is still covered in water. The raven died because it couldn't find a place to land. If there were two of each kind, the raven kind has just been removed from the planet. Or did God just do another special creation to make another raven? There were 7 of each kind of bird, whatever that is, in one version of the story. So if you go with that version instead of the 2 of each kind version, there would still be ravens. But really, how could anyone with any understanding of biology seriously think that there was this bottleneck of every species on the planet and somehow they all survived? And with no food. All the plants were killed when they were covered over a year with 20 feet of salt water. They are all dead. Even if Noah brought seeds from every type of plant with him and then went Johnny Appleseed all over the globe to plant them as the water recedes, putting each in the environment where they will grow, now you need Noah to travel to Australia to plant the eucalyptus trees. How did he get there? Did he get back in the boat? It's stuck on top of a mountain, remember? Maybe he floated over on a log with the kangaroos. When you start trying to fit in the details, the story just gets sillier and sillier. I looked for AIG's answer to this question. I found it. The story does get sillier. First, we know God's word is true, and there was a global flood. Knowing the flood happened, and in light of the fact that we have plants today, the important question is, in what ways did the plants and seeds survive the flood? The logical argument for the fact that plants survived the flood is actually quite simple. The Bible states that there was a worldwide flood. We see plants today. Therefore, plants survived the flood. Someone's poorly researched and unsubstantiated claims should not be cause for doubt. But this does not mean that when people ask these questions, they should be dismissed immediately. The real issue is a matter of the heart. So the proper answer needs to be given in a loving manner. More like a condescending manner. They begin this article with the claim, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. Then they dismiss all the data points to a flood being a story so that they continue to pretend it's true. I need to borrow Uncle Roger for a moment.
Hiya!
Oh my goodness. Reading on, I found my silly scenario really is part of their answer. Another way plants would have survived is if they were taken onto the ark as food for Noah, his family, and the animals. Some of these plants could have been the cereal plants Howe found that were unable to survive a long time immersed in water. Some of these were replanted by Noah and his family after the flood, since we are specifically told he planted a vineyard. Noah Appleseed. And the second part of my scenario, many plants and seeds could have survived on vegetation mats of floating debris. Floating vegetation could have contained many uprooted trees and other plants that could have survived and then regrown once the floodwaters receded. Think, for example, water sprouts. Many herbivorous animals died in the flood, and their carcasses could have floated as carrion on the surface of the waters, holding and protecting their seeds in their bodies. They are seriously suggesting that plants can grow from the carcasses of dead animals? Where is their botanist telling them that this is impossible? Here's what I found on the topic. For the purposes of this answer, I am assuming that you mean a regular green plant with roots, stems, and leaves. In the first place, your skin would form a barrier which a plant would not be able to breach by itself. Plant roots are very good at working their way into hard materials like rock, but they are not designed to penetrate flexible material like skin. In conclusion, a plant will not grow into your flesh if allowed, and I enjoyed working out why that would be the case. Georgia, plants can't take root and grow in dead animals. Even one of AIG's own articles debunks this idea, stating seed germination requires oxygen and water. These are not present inside of rotting animal carcasses. I tried to look this up on Google Scholar and didn't find anything. Evidently, the idea is so weird that no one has even tried an experiment on it, or at least not anyone that's published the results. Trees take years to grow. If they are all dead, the animals can't eat from them. All your kinds that depend on trees for survival would die, and that includes the humans. Where is the oxygen coming from in an ecosystem with no living plants? This is something I hadn't even considered before. AIG says that the plants were all buried in water for about 9 months. Noah and crew are a small group using up the oxygen, but what would this do to the atmosphere? Anyone out there know? If so, leave a comment. I'd be interested in the answer. God just has to keep making one miracle after another to sustain life on the planet after he destroyed the natural balance that had existed. Why not just start over? That would make too much sense, wouldn't it?
God apparently created this kind with a lot of genetic diversity so they could adapt to a wide variety of different environments, which you would have seen in a post-flood world.
Not really. Everything is dead, everywhere. There isn't much variety here. No deserts, no tundra, no tropics. Just salt water, still covering most of it. And dead people, dead animals, dead plants, dead things everywhere. Another thing that I hadn't considered before, since all of the plants have died, there's no oxygen for decomposition. So all the bodies there are just rotting. What a mess your God just made with his little temper tantrum. The world would be one horrid, putrid pile of death.
And it might be one of the reasons why God sent 7 pairs of the flying creatures is to help reestablish those environments, because they're going to be able to get to different places and distant places a lot quicker than other animals and than people. And so they could help prepare those environments.
Seriously? The birds are supposed to prepare the way for other animals to come and repopulate this global graveyard? Even if birds are able to adapt their environment, I don't know if that's true or not. And it's not sufficiently relevant to look up, but even if true, how does that make birds better able to make the environment better suited for other animals? Do you think birds adapt the environment to themselves rather than the other way around? Evidently, birds are the John the Baptist of the animal world. They prepare the way for the rest of the animal kingdom. Maybe they scatter rose petals along the path for them. No, wait. The roses are all dead. This is just silly. Why can they not see how silly this is? I'm not covering the entire program, but later, when talking about how dingoes are really just part of the dog kind, Tim makes an off-the-wall remark that makes you wonder how his brain got there, as wildlife preservation wasn't even being discussed. So why insert this asinine comment here? Who knows? Here it is.
But one thing from a biblical perspective, what we really should be thinking more about is like the preservation of the kind rather than of the species, because in most cases, obviously there are times where you have one that is of a species within that kind that is crucial to keeping it around. But sometimes people will chase around after every little tiny variation and think it's so important to protect that thing when you already have 99 other members of that kind right there, and so it's ultimately not that big of a deal. But so if we're thinking from a biblical perspective, it's more about the kind than the species.
Yeah.
Protecting endangered animals isn't important as long as one member of the kind is still around. This is exactly why this way of thinking isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Tim thinks we don't need grizzly bears, black bears, brown bears, panda bears. As long as there's a single polar bear, that's enough. Let the pandas go extinct. It doesn't matter. As long as there is a single polar bear couple, speciation can bring back the panda bears, just like God made all the bears speciate from a single bear couple just 4,500 years ago. Yes, if we have a polar bear pair and just move them to China, it's possible the pandas will evolve, eventually. But it took hundreds of thousands of years for all that evolution to take place. It's possible it could happen again, but it's not likely, especially not with a single progenitor pair. Hell, we can't get a significant population of pandas from a single progenitor pair of pandas. You're not going to get there with a pair of polar bears. That drastic a change of environment is more likely to kill them than cause rapid speciation from an adaptation. Furthermore, when a population of a species becomes endangered, the ecosystem becomes out of balance. The plants and other animals all depend on each other to survive. The loss of one species can trigger the loss of another. For example, when gray wolves were hunted to near extinction, the beaver population decreased significantly. This happened due to the increase in the elk population from the loss of their predator. To say that it doesn't matter if gray wolves are hunted to extinction because we still have domestic dogs, which is what the panel just said about the dog kind.
Is that wolves and modern domestic dogs are both the same genus and the same species. They're all Canis lupus, right? So they're not, so dingoes then, even though they're considered a different species, they actually, what they're saying in this article is they sort of come from these wolves and domestic dogs somehow. But again, this isn't evolution. This is definitely just variation or speciation within the dog kind that God created.
Is not only callous, but shows a complete lack of understanding of how ecosystems work. On the other hand, when your way of thinking tells you that at a time just 4,500 years ago, there was a mere 1,400 kinds of animals on the planet, if the current 8.7 million species of animals alive today and the 90% of species that are all currently extinct could all speciate from 1,400 kinds 4,000 years ago, why protect endangered species? At this rate, a new species pops into existence every, let's do the math. That's 19,000 new species every year, or 1,600 species every month, 53 new species every day, or 2.2 new species every minute. So yeah, if there really were 2 new species of animal popping into existence every minute, I could see why you would think that protecting endangered species isn't important, because 2 more just popped into existence just in the time that it took me to read that last paragraph. But just a tiny bit of research, and by that I mean a single Google search, shows you that allowing existing ecosystems to go out of balance results in a chain reaction, harmful to the rest of the system. Another species isn't going to just pop into existence to fill the void in a few minutes. Tim's way of thinking leads us to the global catastrophic ignorance of ignoring climate change and other events that are damaging this delicate balance. If we really did have just 2 of each kind of animal, a mere 2,800 animals on the planet, all life would become extinct. The balance of nature would be completely destroyed. But of course, AIG would never admit that, because that would mean admitting that their flood myth is just that, a myth. One thing that could go extinct, and the world would be a better place for it, is Answers in Genesis apologetics. Live your life. Tim thinks we don't need grizzly bears brought